Hey Theory Gang, check out what these examples by James Horner have in common. All of these examples include what I call a doodalidoo, and it's a recurring motif across most of the films James Horner scored. A doodalidoo is most commonly played by trumpets as a triplet of ascending semitones, which then lands on the middle of those pitches as a long, sustained note, which usually fades out. The first three notes are the doodly, and the longer final note is the do. It is a specific form of double neighbor, which is its own little musical motive, as opposed to ornamenting a larger melody. So just to clarify my definition, in this cue from How to Train Your Dragon, the strings have a similar double neighbor figure, but it is too buried in the texture to count as a doodly-doo. This fun Viking theme, also from John Powell's How to Train Your Dragon, would also not count as a doodly-doo because the neighbor figure is buried inside of a larger melody, and it doesn't have the rhythmic relationship of a very fast doodly to the sustained do. In this cue from The Perfect Storm, however, we have what I would call the perfect doodly-doo. There are many variations on this, including making the first interval a whole tone or using other instruments. But it's important that this device could be so frequently used across many musical and cinematic contexts. So what does a doodly-doo do? And why could it so easily fit many musical contexts? Let's start with the second question. The reason this is so versatile stems from the fact that it is essentially an ornament of a single note by quickly grabbing the neighboring tones. This means it can fit over any harmonies or ambient drones. You don't need a particular progression or a type of chord to use it. So then the important question is, what does the doodly-doo do? Well, the effect, it creates a little bit of rhythmic activity because it has fast notes. And that seems noteworthy because most of the doodly-doos happen in rhythmically sparse contexts without a clear sense of meter or a pretty slow tempo. In this cue from The Mask of Zorro, a few doodly-doos really wake up a texture which otherwise would just be a simple rising line in D minor.
Leandro! Anga!
Choose your weapon.
In addition to the rhythmic activity, doodly-doos create a mild bit of tension by grabbing notes in a little cluster, not a fully dissonant cluster chord, but something a little subtler. Here's a slow and sparse example, so maybe you can try hearing that subtle cluster effect. Later in that same cue, we can hear another version of the doodly-doo that's a little more diatonic by making the first interval a whole tone instead of a semitone. With that in mind, imagine you've got to underscore a scene where you don't want a pulsing ostinato or big theme, but your ambient texture just sounds a little dull. a doodly-doo immediately gives it a little bit of spice, but not too much. A great example of this is the Avatar cue, You Don't Dream in Cryo. One of the first doodly-doos that we hear in that cue is interacting with a soprano melody, and that's one of James Horner's favorite pairings for this technique. As well as a doodly-doo that dials up the tension by happening at the same time as a high note in the soprano melody. The interaction of those two parts has a little bit of clash that makes that high point even more climactic, at least at a local level. Doodly-doos don't have to be played on a trumpet. They can also go to low brass or a woodwind instrument. It makes it a little bit more subtle or adds variety when there are multiple doodly-doos in a row. There's another reason you might want to put a doodly-doo into a woodwind instrument, and that is if you have Branford Marsalis to play on your score, you should probably let him play a few. In the action horror film Aliens, James Horner ratchets up the dissonance quality of a doodly-doo by adding a second trumpet part playing a sort of inverted version, and then adding an echoplex effect. Two parts keep overlapping and echoing. Most of the time, a doodly-doo serves as a relatively subtle motif. But in Troy, much like Sneakers, it gets full-on thematic status. So that movie may be somewhat of an outlier because the doodly-doo is actually more than just waking up a stagnant texture. Because it's more thematic, you hear them just so often in that movie and a lot more prominently. Next time you want some mild tension to a relatively flat underscore, try adding a trumpet doodly-doo. There's more James Horner analysis in my video on post-tonal music theory, and be sure to check out my playlist analyzing other film and TV music. If you want to support content like this and my vision to make music theory inspiring and accessible, please consider becoming a member on Patreon or buying something in the shop over there.